Hello and good day, everyone. My name is Darlena Birch, MBA, RDN, and most importantly, public health dietitian. Welcome to my YouTube channel where I talk about U.S. federal nutrition programs, the important role they play in ensuring the health and well-being of all Americans, and how public health dietitians work tirelessly to support these amazing programs. For today's episode, I'm going to talk about position papers, fact sheets, and general advocacy. As a public health dietitian working for a national nonprofit in Washington, D.C., a lot of my work focuses on creating these types of publications for the use of advocacy. So let me begin by first defining what a position paper is. A position paper presents an arguable opinion about an issue. An author who writes a position paper is making an argument which has to be built upon evidence. The structure used to do this is very similar to that used when writing a critical essay. The goal of a position paper is to convince the audience that your opinion is valid and worth listening to. Ideas that you are considering need to be carefully examined in choosing a topic, developing your argument, and organizing your paper. It's very important to ensure that you are addressing all sides of the issue and presenting it in a manner that is easy for your audience to understand. Your job is ultimately to take one side of the argument and persuade your audience that you have well-founded knowledge on the topic being presented. It's also important to support your argument with evidence to ensure the validity of your claims, as well as to address the counterclaims to show that you are well informed about both sides. So the first thing I'm going to talk about when writing your own position paper is the issue criteria. To take a side on a subject, you should first establish the plausibility of a topic that interests you. Ask yourself the following questions to ensure that you will be able to present a strong argument. Is it a real issue with genuine controversy and uncertainty? Can you distinctly identify two positions? Are you personally interested in advocating one of these positions? And is the issue narrow enough to be manageable? Next, I'm going to talk about analyzing an issue and developing an argument. Once your topic is selected, you should do some research on the subject matter. While you may already have an opinion on your topic and an idea about which side of the argument you want to take, you need to ensure that your position is well supported. Listing out the pros and cons sides of the topic will help you examine your ability to support your counterclaims, along with a list of supporting evidence for both sides. Supporting evidence includes the following: factual knowledge, which is information that is verifiable and agreed upon by almost everyone; statistical inferences, which is interpretation and examples of an accumulation of facts; informed opinion, which is an opinion developed through research and/or expertise of the claim; and lastly, personal testimony, which is personal experience related by a knowledgeable party. Once you have made your pro and con lists, compare the information side by side. Considering your audience as well as your own viewpoint, choose the position that you will take. In considering the audience, ask yourself the following questions. Who is your audience? What do they believe? Where do they stand on the issue? How are their interests involved? And what evidence is likely to be effective with them? In determining your viewpoint, ask yourself the following. Is your topic interesting? Can you manage the material within the specifications set by your organization? Does your topic assert something specific and propose a plan of action? And do you have enough material to support your opinion? Next, I want to talk about organizing your position paper. Your introduction should lead up to the thesis that organizes the rest of your paper. There are 3 advantages to leading with the thesis. 1, the audience knows where you stand. 2, the thesis is located in the strongest places, first and last. And 3, it is the most common form of academic argument used. Now, everything I've just shared from you actually comes from a Rutgers University handout, and this handout is helpful for anyone new to writing position papers. However, in my reality, this isn't generally the process I followed when writing a position paper. In my professional work, a majority of the position papers that I help author actually come from one of my organization's committees or task forces. Therefore, my role is to help guide the committee or task force with framing and authoring their argument. And there's also references. I am really great at formatting references for position papers. So for my personal outline that I'm going to share with you, I want to talk about the 5 pieces that I always include in any position paper that I'm helping with authoring. 1, there's the introduction, which is explaining the importance of the topic at hand. 2, there's the boilerplate. Then 3, there's the argument. 4th comes the recommendations. And then the 5th piece is the conclusion. So with regards to the introduction, you always want to include an introduction to the topic that you're explaining. The reason being because you want to make sure that the topic that you're writing about is not only easily understood among the population with which you're trying to speak to, but also by someone who maybe wouldn't know anything about the topic you're talking to. So you're trying to explain to them the topic and why it's important to understand. For example, if the topic is on breastfeeding, then it's helpful to talk about breastfeeding within the context of your population group. Since I work in WIC, then breastfeeding within WIC is what would be important to introduce, and how the WIC program supports breastfeeding amongst participants. Once you've introduced the topic at hand, then introducing your organization is important to do as well. And if you're writing on behalf of yourself as an individual, then it's important to give a brief introduction of who you are. Now, I find it's best to do this using a standard boilerplate. And a boilerplate is simply any written text that can be reused in new contexts or applications without significant changes to the original. For my organization, we have a boilerplate that we use across our publications, explaining who we are and what we do. For my YouTube channel and many others you've likely seen, you may even notice that there are standard intros and outros. These can actually also be thought of as boilerplates. After the introduction and boilerplate, you'll want to start framing the argument. I'm not going to go too much into the weeds here, but basically the arguments often consist of multiple talking points to which you want to assign various headers in your position paper. And once you finish sharing your argument, then you'll want to share recommendations for how to make actionable change. Lastly, you'll close with the conclusion. So that's my explanation on position papers. If you have any questions or comments, please feel free to leave a comment and I'll happily respond. Next, I'm going to talk about fact sheets. In its simplest terms, a fact sheet is a written document containing information for the public. Another way to define a fact sheet is as a one-page document that provides basic information on a specific topic in an easy and quick-to-read format. Now, the general recommendation for a fact sheet is one page, but again, here's where I feel like education and application differ. While the majority of the fact sheets I've helped produce professionally are generally one page front and back, there are fact sheets that I've helped produce and have seen produced by other public health organizations that exceed this one-page limit. Fact sheets are particularly useful to reporters and state and national legislators, and all of these aforementioned groups are ones that my organization interacts with on a regular basis. So what do these groups have in common? It's easy. They have very little time to gather enough information to write a quality article or make a quality decision, hence the importance of a fact sheet. So the first thing to keep in mind when authoring a fact sheet is its content. You should write in layman's terms, using words that the average person or someone without professional training in the subject area can understand. This is really important. I find professionally that I often find myself slipping into jargon that's very specific to my community, but when you're writing a fact sheet, you're actually trying to make it so that anyone, whether they're inside or outside of the community, can understand the message that you're ultimately trying to communicate. It's also important to find ways to simplify complex ideas. Search for comparisons and everyday analogies that will express complicated processes. You're trying to transform jargon into English. It's also important to write in the present tense and as active as possible. And keep the text brief because no one wants to read tons of information in small font. Keep the most important information in the first paragraph of your fact sheet. State what the issue is, what action is needed, and label the main messages. Use terms consistently and double check all numbers and percentages used. If details are given in a table or chart, there is no need to give those details in narrative. You can just use the general terms instead. And if using lists, definitely use bullet points. The fact sheet must also be self-contained. Do not refer to previous documents or assume the reader will remember information from another document. Another important aspect to consider when writing your fact sheet is the layout. A one-page limit is best for your fact sheet. Using size 10 to 14 point font is important. The page should begin with the words fact sheet followed by a very brief headline that explains the subject of the page. Use bullets when you can, leave a lot of white space, and use bolding, text boxes, and graphics to emphasize important points. Simple graphs and charts can give the reader their information with just a glance, so it's always important to incorporate those where you can, and pie charts are the easiest to understand. And then give references for more information. In electronic communications, you can actually just offer links. Next, I'm going to talk about some typical writing errors you might find with fact sheets. It's important to identify all acronyms at first use, then use the acronym only for the rest of the document. For example, CVV is a term that's used often in WIC and it stands for cash value voucher. So after you've used it the first time, spelled out as cash value voucher, and then putting in parentheses CVV, you can move forward with only referencing CVV. In narrative, you should use the word percent rather than the percent symbol itself, and avoid using decimals when using percents. When using numbers, in general, any number below 10 should be written out as a word and above 10 as an actual numeral. Now, these recommendations I just provided regarding writing errors, I would say largely depends on your organization. And again, this is where academia may vary a little bit different from professional application. Within my organization, there's actually brand guidelines that outline stylistic details such as numbers and when you can and can't use percentages, even how certain words should be spelled. So that's my spiel on fact sheets. Next, I want to tie these two topics together regarding position papers and fact sheets and how they play a role in general advocacy. Advocacy is defined as public support for or recommendation of a particular cause or policy. Advocacy is a broad term that refers to speaking out on issues or supporting a proposal or cause. Advocacy is a crucial part of the democratic process that allows citizens to express their viewpoints and opinions to policymakers. Everyone engages in advocacy to some extent. It is an inherent part of promoting current projects and highlighting successes. You can engage in a wide range of advocacy activities without getting close to lobbying activities, which may be regulated by federal or state law. And I'll talk more about lobbying in a few moments. So advocacy is actually where fact sheets are particularly helpful because they allow you to educate others on a particular topic or issue using an easy-to-read tool to communicate your talking points. Position papers are also helpful for general public education, although due to length, if they are given to a legislator, it's more of a just-in-case means for them to do some light reading in their free time. This brings me to my next talking point, which is about educating the public. Ultimately, the purpose of a fact sheet, and arguably even a position paper, is to help facilitate public education. Public education is the foundation of most advocacy initiatives, and policymakers do not know the true value of a program unless they hear from staff and participants about how a program directly benefits the community itself. Therefore, educating the public is a form of advocacy and not lobbying. Now, lobbying is a particular form of advocacy that is targeted at influencing the outcome of a specific legislation. The First Amendment guarantees your constitutional rights to lobby. However, depending on who you are or where you work, you may want to take precautions to ensure that you're lobbying in a private capacity. Federal law defines two forms of lobbying and regulates the conduct of lobbying in certain circumstances. So the first form of lobbying is direct lobbying, which is an individual's attempt to influence a policymaker on a specific proposal. The second, grassroots lobbying, is an individual's attempt to mobilize others to influence a policymaker on a specific proposal. Now, under the federal definition, there are three elements that determine whether an activity is advocacy versus lobbying. The first is the advocacy must be a communication with a legislator or government official or employee in charge of developing the legislation/policy or with the general public that encourages the recipient to take action to contact a legislator or government official or employee. Second, the advocacy must refer to specific legislation or measures in a piece of legislation. And three, the advocacy must reflect a view on that legislation. Remember, bragging beats begging. When unclear about the line between advocacy and lobbying, err toward highlighting your own successes rather than asking a policymaker to act in a specific way. Now, I want to close with stating that federal and state laws define when lobbying activity is permissible. Furthermore, public employees may have additional office policies that regulate the ability to either advocate or lobby during work hours. If you are a public employee and are confused about what you are allowed to do while on paid work time, limit your lobbying efforts to coffee breaks, lunch breaks, after hours, and other personal time when you are not on the clock. Always check with your supervisor before lobbying during work hours. And when acting as a private citizen on your own time without using your employer's resources, just remember that you have a First Amendment right to lobby and engage your elected officials. And that's my episode for today. A special shout out to the National WIC Association for the resources they provide on advocacy and lobbying. I pulled a lot of my information from the website today, and I'll include the link in the description box so you can check them out. Thank you for joining me today. If you like what you see, please smash the like button and subscribe to my YouTube channel. And remember, you are your own best advocate. Feed your body well, nourish your soul, nurture your mind, and nutrify your spirit. Remain true to yourself, and never forget that every second forward is another opportunity to be a better version of your past self.